So for the second principle, we talked about agreeing population density with land size. Now let's explore this principle a little further, because it's very much relevant to today's social development. In particular, we'll focus on the discussion of migration flow and land utility. Cui Shi, a person called Cui Shi, he was the government minister during the Eastern Han Dynasty. And his work and writing on the agricultural economy and related the production technique in China had great impact on the research of ancient Chinese economy. By the way, his work has also been translated to German and Japanese in the mid-90s of the last century. Now, in his work, Essays on Politics, Cui Shi said, the ancient sages distributed the cultivated land to every man, and the land was proportional to the population. Now, in some provinces, the population is dense and the land is insufficient to support it. And thus, the people, while in the other provinces, the population is sparse, but the land is uncultivated, although it is fitted for the growing of grain. The old plan of removing poor people who cannot have their own occupation to those places where the land is plenty should here be followed. This is the policy for the development of the land and the help of the people. So this theory of removing the poor people who cannot have their own occupation to places where the land is plenty is basically a common idea of the Chinese. The reason for this kind of arrangement is ultimately about the people's wealth. So to look for theoretical explanation of this proposal, we'll examine the writing of another person called Ye Shi. They're not related though. They have a very similar name. So Ye Shi was a Confucian of Song Dynasty. Okay, and some of his writing has been recorded in what is called the General Research on Literature and Authorities, which was compiled by Ma Duanlin in 1307. So Ye Shi observed that the development of the land depends on the possession of the people, whereas tax income and national wealth depend on the development of the land. If people have no land to cultivate and cannot establish their own occupation, they will be poor. Those who are, those who are dull and unskillful will become dependent servants, and those who are strong and selfish will become robbers. This way, people will gradually become covetous, licentious, deceitful, faithless, and dishonest. Now we can see that both Cui Shi and Ye Shi propose giving people free land by migrating people from the overpopulated area to underpopulated area, so that the land utility can be improved. And more importantly, the people can establish their own occupation. So from the point of view of national wealth, Ye Shi illustrated a model of land, development, and then tax income, right? The tax income comes from people's work. Now, of course, in modern society, lands are mostly privately owned, and so it's impossible to just redistribute land. But as we said before, the notion of land represents a field of work. It's not just physical land, and the field of work is not just agricultural land. It can be any platform where people make their living. This platform is also changed constantly with the evolution of society and technology. For example, old professions disappear and new professions are born. This means people lose their ownership of the land when their skills become irrelevant, and people have no land to cultivate and cannot establish their own occupation when they have no education or skill. So in modern society, giving people land to establish their own occupation means investing very heavily in education. And this can be skill training, retraining, and moral education. So this way, newly emerged occupations are equivalent to unoccupied land that is, needed to be cultivated. So the government needs to make an effort to move the people to those lands, right? And it was the responsibility of the government in the ancient times as well as today. So the theory of migration of people and land utility is, I think, is still very much relevant, and it even applies to a country or state with no free land at all. Now let's have a look at some of the description of just how the government were involved in the helping the migration of population and improving land utility in ancient China. Here we have to introduce another great official, Cao Cuo. Cao Cuo was a very famous and intelligent political scientist and minister during the early Han Dynasty. By the way, all of these writings and excerpts are included in the reading. Okay, so you can have a look at your own time. Now, some of Cao Cuo's view has been recorded in the Book of Han, and he described the moving of population from a distance to the empty land as follows. He said, first of all, the government carried out geographical survey, right? And I think we talked about this before. The local temperature of the climate was examined. The taste of the water and the characteristics of the soil and plants were tested. Then the government built the city. The streets were fixed and the roads of the farms were connected, and the boundaries of the fields were divided. In terms of the residential houses, each house had one hall and 2 chambers. The government also provided each house with tools and basic furniture. This was to encourage the people to leave their old residence area behind and move to the new city, because everything was made ready for them. He also mentioned that in addition to those, the government arranged health services for the migrants by assigning doctors to them and provided a place for worship. There were also dedicated areas of common cemetery, places to grow plants and animals, etc. So all of these made the people feel that they were in a comfortable place and they wanted to settle down permanently. Well, of course, based on Cao Cuo's description, this is probably one of the most ideal examples of migration, right? And not all large-scale migrations were done at the highest standard. But this is what the ancient government had aimed for. In fact, since the Han Dynasty, if you look at the history, the policy of moving population had been carried into effect many times. Now, having studied the ancient governing principles on migration, let's think about the nature of government economic policy for a minute. We say that the ancient Chinese governing principle adopt a middle way, right? We said that many times. And in chapter 5, we said the government adopted a middle way between government regulation and laissez-faire policy, right? So from what we have learned so far, it seems that the government greatly intervene in the area of population migration. So what's the reason for that? Well, under the theory of free competition and perfect market, it says that people should have full access to information of different locations, and they have proper means of transportation. They can do whatever they want. They can go wherever they want. So therefore, people would naturally distribute themselves nicely. But in reality, there are many circumstances under which competition is not free and people are not rational. In the first place, people have to, they will not care to move because it is, human nature to become attached to the old place. Well, that's the first thing. In the second place, people do not know how to move because they don't know what place is good for them. That is about information and symmetry. In the third place, in the ancient times, ordinary people didn't have necessary transportation. Therefore, the moving of population by the government is a necessary thing, although, the moving is voluntary. But in modern society, the government is also responsible for migration of population, but the complexity is much greater. To demonstrate the importance of, ancient teaching in the modern economy, we'll look at the example of the Great Western Development Plan of China. Some of you may know that. Since the opening of China in 1978, right, the coastal regions of eastern China benefited greatly from the market reforms, and their economies quickly raced ahead. But the western half of China lagged behind. The Great Western Development Plan was initiated in 2000 with the purpose of promoting the economic development of the western region of China. And this region contains around 71.4% of mainland China's area, but only 28.8% of the population. As the data shown at the end of 2002. And in terms of GDP, it only contributed 20% of the total economic output as of 2015. So if we use the word land from the migration of population in the case of Great Western Development Plan of China, land involves much more than agricultural land. It is anything that provides people with an opportunity to set up their own occupation. Now, this could mean both physical land or simply work opportunity. So this includes things like infrastructure development, such as the West-East gas pipeline construction project in 2002 and the Qinghai-Tibet railway construction project in 2006. And this also includes environmental project, what is called the Returning Grazing Land to Grassland project in 2003. Well, here's the issue. Here's a problem. While the project has achieved much in the infrastructure development, things are being built, but there was still a huge difference between the eastern and the western region in terms of economic output. This was partially caused by short-term GDP target and repeated construction. The western region has not been able to attract sufficient human resources, and many of the young people from the western region still want to work in the eastern region because of better pay and higher living standard. Further, many of the infrastructure and utility development end up serving the eastern region, and the western region has not benefited as much as we hope for. So this results in a lacking of core competitiveness of the western region economy, which is relatively closed as compared to the more open economy in the eastern region. So there is much to learn from this experience. One important lesson is that the people didn't feel like moving to the new location because they were not provided with enough sense of security or comfort. So this has led to the difficulties of attracting young talent to the region. That's lesson number one. Another lesson is that local characteristics were not well understood. This does not mean the geographical characteristics, but the economic characteristics. The necessary question to ask is that what is the economic advantage of the Western region? How can the Western region create its own economic edge, which can reduce its dependence on the Eastern region economy? That's an important question. So, in order to unite the Eastern economy, Eastern region, the Chinese government initiated, as you probably know by now, the One Belt, One Road project. Now, the key of this project is to fully utilize the geographical advantage of the Western region. The Western region can develop its own open economy by recreating the modern Silk Road with the Eurasian countries. So, by providing private enterprise a more efficient commercial environment and combined with the westward infrastructure development, it becomes more attractive for companies and talent to stay in the Western region. Now, of course, we have to, omit most of the details because of time constraint, but the point that we're trying to make is that the One Belt, One Road project is moving the Chinese economy towards the right direction because it values the importance of local characteristics and not simply a replication of the Eastern region. In Cao Cuo's writing, I hope you still remember who he is, he said that when encouraging population to move to a new location, the temperature of the climate is examined, the taste of the water tested, fitness of the soil judged, and the richness of the plants looked into. So all of these represent the process of understanding the local economy. So I guess despite the complexity of modern economy, the principle of population migration still applies.